The Nottingham attacker has just been sentenced today and he has been detained in a high security hospital. So the man responsible for killing 2 students and a school caretaker on the streets of Nottingham and then attempting to run over 3 pedestrians has been sentenced. The judge told Calocane it is likely he will never be released so that he can receive treatment for paranoid schizophrenia, a mental illness that can be mitigated with treatment but not cured. Judge Mr. Justice Turner added he was satisfied Calocane would not have committed his appalling crimes had he not been suffering from the illness. In the early hours of Tuesday the 13th of June 2023, the city was shaken by a series of brutal attacks which left 3 people dead. University of Nottingham students Grace O'Malley, Kumar, and Barnaby Webber, both 19, were fatally stabbed in Ilkeston Road. They were walking home from an end-of-term party at Prism nightclub and were around 200 metres from their student accommodation when the savage attack occurred. Just an hour later, school caretaker Ian Coates, 65, was killed in a further knife attack in Magdala Road, where his white van was then stolen by Calocane. 3 people were then hit by the van and were lucky to survive the impact. Calocane was located by police shortly after the attacks. Now I'll play a little footage now of when Calocane was arrested by the police and a little timeline of his attacks.
The murderer is making his final manoeuvres. The windscreen smashed, the driver edges the van forward, but police at the bottom of the road have him cornered. A second attempt at escape stalls. The driver changes gears and for a moment tries to reverse. But by now there is no backing away from his alleged crimes. An officer runs towards the van with a taser gun seen here in his hand. He manages to open a door and fire the taser inside. You can see it in the corner, fully discharged. A second officer with a second taser rushes to help, before grabbing the suspect by his arm and wrestling him from the van. They spend the next 11 minutes holding him on the ground as other officers arrive, and eventually the suspect's escorted away by police, head bowed, his shameful rampage over.
As you can see by the video, he was tasered by armed police officers in Bentinck Road and arrested and charged with 3 murders and 3 attempted murders. Calocane, of no fixed address, pleaded guilty to 3 counts of manslaughter by reason of diminished responsibility and 3 counts of attempted murder at Nottingham Crown Court. The Crown accepted his pleas after 4 psychiatric reports found Calocane suffered from paranoid schizophrenia and had a serious mental health episode at the time of the attacks. However, they said he would have understood the nature of his conduct, namely killing his victims with a knife and running over 3 others in a van. Calocane had been sectioned under the Mental Health Act several times and released by mental health services before he went on to commit the attacks. The attacks happened over a period of about 90 minutes across several parts of the city. Calocane had travelled up from London on the train prior to the attacks at 11:30 p.m. on June the 12th before taking a tram to the Ratford area. He had told his family by phone, "This is the last time I will talk to you." He spent several hours walking around the city before hiding in a pedestrian alleyway near Ilkeston Road, dressed in black with a rucksack containing 3 knives and a scaffolding pole. The prosecution said Calocane had clearly planned to hide and wait for potential victims, and this was designed for the maximum element of surprise. Just before 4 a.m. he emerged from the alleyway and repeatedly stabbed Barnaby and Grace in Ilkeston Road before calmly walking away from the scene. Officers were alerted by a 999 call made by a neighbour who heard screaming. Paramedics arrived within minutes, but due to the serious injury sustained, they were only able to save the 2 students. Approximately 1 hour later, Calocane was caught on CCTV trying to break into supported living accommodation in Mapley Road, having walked there via Forest Recreation Ground. As you can see, it's in the footage that I've just shown you there, where he's trying to climb through a downstairs window before being pushed away by a resident, or punched. Luckily for the resident who was in the property, he punched him and he got him away. Otherwise, he would have went in and tried to attack the residents. The defendant then walked to a nearby Magdala Road in the Mapley area, where at around 5:15 a.m. he killed Mr. Coates before taking his white van and heading towards the city centre. He deliberately ran over a man in Milton Street before minutes later driving into a man and a woman at the junction of Upper Parliament Street and Market Street. The Milton Street victim sustained multiple injuries, including a fractured skull and a bleed on the brain. The other 2 victims who were on their way to work also suffered injuries. The woman was treated for broken ribs, a broken toe and a bruised spleen, while the man suffered wounds to his head and leg. All 3 were lucky to survive the attacks. The officers managed to track down the van and arrested Calocane in Bentinck Road at 5:35 a.m, 91 minutes after the first 999 call. The officers approached the van after it came to a stop, and armed officers tasered Calocane after he produced a knife. He was charged 3 days after his arrest. Calocane, who was a former Nottingham University student, knew none of the victims he attacked on the day. Calocane was sentenced today live on TV. Assistant Chief Constable Rob Griffin, who has led the overall policing response to the events of June the 13th, said the devastating impact that the events of the 13th of June have had and continue to have for the families of those killed and those that survived these dreadful attacks are immeasurable. The attacks were utterly senseless and resulted in the loss of life for 3 entirely innocent people. Grace and Barnaby were just walking home from a student night out while Ian was carrying out his daily duties. Detective Superintendent Lee Sanders, who led the investigation, also added the savage attacks that unfolded on the 13th of June were terrifying, not only for the victims but also for those who witnessed them. And I'd like to thank those who reported incidents or came forward with vital information.
Having heard the medical evidence which has been given in court by Professor Blackwood, Dr McSweeney and Dr Mervis, and having read the reports prepared by them for the court, together with those from Dr Shavilufa and Dr Latham, all of whom are approved by the Secretary of State under Section 12(2) of the Mental Health Act 1983, I am satisfied that you are suffering from a mental disorder, namely paranoid schizophrenia. This disorder is of a nature which makes it appropriate for you to be detained in a hospital for medical treatment, and appropriate medical treatment is available for you at Ashworth Secure Hospital. I am of the opinion that because of all the circumstances of your case, including the nature of the offences to which you pleaded guilty and the history of mental illness, and having considered all the other available ways in which I might deal with you, the most suitable method of dealing with your case is by making an order under Section 37 of the Mental Health Act 1983. I therefore make an order under all 6 counts of the indictment that you will be readmitted to and detained at Ashworth High Security Hospital. I've also considered whether this order should be subject to special restrictions which are specified in Section 41 of the Act. In the light of the medical evidence which I have identified, I am satisfied that because of the nature of your offence and also having regard to your past, including your history of mental illness, and to the risk that you will commit further offences if you're not detained, it's necessary to protect the public from serious harm, and it is not possible to say for how long that will be so. Accordingly, I order that you be subject to the special restrictions set out in Section 41 of the Mental Health Act 1983.
So Calocane will be held indefinitely in a secure or a high security hospital. But if this was somebody who was of sane mind, went on to kill 3 people on 3 attempted murders, he would be serving a whole life tariff, life without parole. But for me, this sort of case is what I should say is quite tricky, because from my own judgment, somebody who is like this, I think, who isn't of sound mind, is more dangerous than somebody who is, because they can flip at any moment. And if they don't take the medication, then they are a complete risk to members of the public. So for me, somebody like this, who has got paranoid schizophrenia, I think should be also serving life without parole for killing 3 people, 3 innocent people, 2 teenage students, and a caretaker going about his daily work. This man, in my eyes, should never be walking the streets again, because he could be back on the streets within 10 years if they think that he no longer suffers from this illness. But what happens if the illness then comes back? So for me, these people that suffer from this sort of illness and they get away with diminished responsibility, I think they should still be serving the same sentence as somebody who is in sane mind. But that is just my own personal opinion. Let me know what you think in the comments, people. But again, if you are enjoying the content, remember to comment, like and subscribe.